After looking at the obvious offensive players, now we're looking at the obvious defensive players for the Sun Devils in 2024.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. Thanks, as always, for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. You can stay in touch with that content by following me on Twitter at RichieBrads36 and the podcast as well at LO_Sun Devils. And, of course, a shout-out to my everydayers who are here every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. Today, we are discussing the top defensive players to take a look at this upcoming season in 2024. There are plenty of guys that we need to talk about. And some are pretty obvious, which is what we're doing today. Some of them not so obvious, which is what we're talking about tomorrow. So make sure that you're staying in touch so that you can keep up with all of that. But today, the obvious names on defense. And truthfully, I'm curious how many of these guys you know. And it's simply because in today's age, a lot of people pay attention to the offensive side of the football, not so much the defensive side. And these guys weren't like all Pac-12 players or anything like that. So you have to let me know if you guys are super aware of who they are, or maybe you're not aware. But to me, these are the ones that, based off what we saw last year, stand out as the obvious ones in my book. We'll go ahead and get started with the pass rushers, because these are by far the most notable guys. They are bookends as long as everything works out. They're beasts. We'll start with the man who tied for the team's sack total last year, and that's Prince Dorbah. Dorbah, of course, was coming in as a transfer from Texas, where he got next to no starting time with the Longhorns. Comes to Arizona State and just flourishes, man. 30 total tackles and tied for the team lead in sacks with 6. He tied, of course, with BJ Green, who's no longer with the team. I would love for him to come back, but he is still going around in the transfer portal right now after decommitting from Washington following Kalen DeBoer leaving. So that ship is probably sailed, unfortunately, but it's okay because we got 2 really good pass rushers. And Prince Dorbah is one of the dudes who is very easy to notice. He had 2 games last year where he had 2 or more sacks. He had 2.5 against Colorado and 2 against Fresno State. He started off the year really, really hot. In fact, he got all 6 of his stats within the first about month and a half of the year. But then he was banged up a little bit, and he didn't finish the season for the team. He missed the final 2 games against Oregon and U of A. So he started really hot, but then he cooled off and then missed a couple of games. And I feel like that might deter some people from looking at Dorbah as a potential bookend. But if you got to watch him play last year, you know exactly how explosive this kid is and how dynamic he is off the edge. We are waiting to see him kind of finish off all of his different pass rushing sets, like with the ability to use his hands enough or understand leverage and all that. It's there, but we're waiting for it to take that next step forward. But in the meantime, he's got things you can't teach. Like the overall athleticism with this kid gets you really excited. The speed. This kid can get up and go right off the snap. And I think that's one of his biggest assets that he's going to bring to this team in this upcoming season, is the ability to be that get up and go guy. Very, very impressive young man. 6'2", 230, not the biggest guy in the world, but again, when you've got the assets that he does in terms of the pure athleticism and the speed, you're going to be able to make up for that. So the next step is being able to develop your pass rushing skills and all of the sets that you can do. And we should be able to get there pretty quickly. He's going to be working with Brian Ward again. And Ward is one of the best defensive minds that the Sun Devils have had in the last several years. He is beyond his years intelligent and really was able to get a lot out of his defensive line this past year. Remember, the Sun Devils in 2022 had 17 sacks on the year, I believe. It might have been 16. This past year, they had 26. Pretty drastic upgrade, especially when you consider that some of the guys were banged up, including Dorbah and the other guy we're going to talk about here in just a second. But having Dorbah back in the folds, more than likely as your ace pass rusher, should get you a little bit excited, especially if some of the depth behind them is able to develop a little bit. Like you're going to have Garen Stansbury is back again. You'll have some of the interior guys as well that we'll talk about in just a little bit. There are some young guys here. Ramar Williams is coming in that you're excited to see how they develop, but it's really about Prince Dorbah. And then, of course, his partner in crime across from him, Clayton Smith. Clayton Smith was one of the guys that I was most excited about last year. A former 5-star prospect out of Texas, played 2 years at Oklahoma, and similar to Dorbah, was just unable to get on the field. So he transfers to Arizona State and has no problem getting on the field. The one quote-unquote problem that he had was staying healthy. He had missed about a month of football at the very start of the year. And then I think he left games in total like 3 times last year. He just was banged up, which was the story for pretty much everybody on the Sun Devils last year. But once he finally got healthy, I mean, he was dialed in and he was a beast. He had a 5-game stretch starting from the Colorado game on October 7th to the Oregon game on November 18th, where he went half sack, sack and a half sack, sack. So all 4.5 of his sacks came within a 5-game stretch where he was just red hot off the edge. And sure, 4.5 sacks doesn't seem like that much. Totally understand, especially when you look at the whole of the team and they only had 27 or 20. What it was 26, wasn't it? 26. I understand why some people would be hesitant to say that the pass rush was not good last year. Totally understand that. But with that being said, they were doing a lot more up front in terms of the pressures department, and that was Clayton Smith last year. Just like what I said about Dorbah, he's got just ridiculous athleticism. He might be faster than Dorbah. So if he continues to add stuff to his tools and becomes a better guy using his hands and the leverage and the moves to be able to stay off of blocks and keep their hands off of you, like he's going to really turn into a stud player for this team. And Clayton Smith is perhaps the defensive player I'm most excited about this year. Truly. Like, there's a lot of guys I'm really interested to see how they perform. Some guys that we'll talk about a little bit later, right? But when I look at Clayton Smith, I see nothing but potential. And we've seen it flash. A 5-game stretch of getting to the quarterback every single game. The pure athleticism, the pure talent and upside that he possesses. It gets me really excited. And I would tell you that it should get you excited as well. But perhaps more than anything is matching him across from Prince Dorbah. Having those two opposite each other is, like I have said, bookend edge rushers. Bookend edge rushers. having those guys opposite each other is going to make their respective lives a lot easier because they are just so talented that offensive lines are going to have a very difficult time trying to identify who they need to double or who they need to have a separate game plan for because they're both guys that are capable of taking over a game. I'm not ready to call them next level players, but I am ready to tell you that they are absolutely some of the most important players for the Sun Devils in 2024, which is why, of course, they're on this list. If you aren't sure who Clayton Smith or Prince Dorbah are, don't worry. You'll know who they are by the end of the season. Clayton Smith, just so you know, is jersey number 3, and Prince Dorbah, just so you know, is jersey number 32. Pay attention. You'll notice them very quickly. They are dynamic off the edge. You can tell that Clayton Smith was a former 5-star kid. You can tell that Prince Dorbah immediately came in and showed off the talent. If they pick up where they left off, I believe in these kids to be terrific pass rushers together. But they're going to make the lives of the rest of the defense really easier as well. We're going to talk about the next few guys on my list here. It's the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So bring your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. As always, wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. Make sure that you check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube so you're up to date with all the big stories in college, in pros, across all leagues. So you got our national shows, and we'll let you know what's going on from the Carolina Panthers making their head coaching hire to Kayshon Boutte, the wide receiver at New England, or the New England Patriots, placing over 8,900 bets illegally. He wasn't 21 when he made these bets. Stay in touch. We're going to get you caught up on everything. Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming on YouTube, first of its kind. Back into our conversation. Next guy here that is obvious. Looking at the interior of the line here, there was not very many consistent players last year. You had Deshaun Mallory, who was an absolute wrecking ball from the interior of the line. He was one of the top 10 guys in tackles for the team last year. He had 2 sacks, 4 pass deflections, but the bummer is he ran out of eligibility, so he is moving on. Hopefully to the pros, fingers crossed, but he's gone. You are now looking for guys in the interior to be able to step up. And you've got some interesting players like Tristan Munday and Sam Benjamin. There's other guys that are coming in along the interior as well. You're looking to see who can step up. Anthony Cooper is returning. He was banged up for, oh my God, pretty much all of last season. Felt like he missed time consistently. But there was one guy who was able to stay on the field, one guy who was able to really show off as a freshman. I'm sure you guys have figured out who I'm talking about by now. And if you don't, let me fill you in on the darling of the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, CJ Fite. CJ Fite's a beast, dude. This is your true nose tackle, but he plays so much better than his size. At 6'2", 315, yeah, He's a big boy. He's going to eat all sorts of gaps and all sorts of space. He's going to take on double teams, and he's going to make life a lot easier for the linebackers and keep their jerseys clean. But he's explosive. We saw this all the time last year. And it was also really evident to us who were able to go to training camp, who were able to see him in action during practices. You saw how intelligent he was. You saw how disruptive he could be. He really did stand out amongst, like 3-year guys. Like, you were seeing Deshaun Mallory look like a beast, and then right next to him was CJ Fite. And then he plugged him into the same defense, and suddenly what was a horrific run defense became respectable. And part of that was because of CJ Fite. A large part of that was because of CJ Fite. You had a guy who understood what it took to have gap integrity, to be able to take on multiple blocks. Sure, didn't get a sack last year. Sure, only 15 total tackles. Whatever. End of the day, this dude was just finding a way to create an easier environment for the guys around him. He's coming back this year as a true sophomore after getting significant playing time last year, and he worked his way out there. He really did. Like, sure, injuries were really bad, but it got to a point where you could not come up with very good reasons to keep CJ Fite off the field, and that's going to be the case again this year. Fite is one of the most experienced guys coming back. He's a true sophomore. He is a true sophomore. He's got some of the most experience playing along the interior. Anthony Cooper's back. He's played all over the place. He missed a ton of time last year. I am excited for Anthony Cooper to be back with the versatility to play inside and outside, but CJ Fite, man, this is the guy who's going to make life easier for everybody else. And look, we just talked about how Clayton Smith and Prince Dorbah create bookend edge rushers for you, and they create really dynamic pass rushing combos. Well, another thing that's going to help them is CJ Fite's going to be facing double teams, which means those guys are going to be having one-on-one opportunities. And if they take the next steps forward that I believe they can, then, man, your defensive line just became a huge strength for you. And it was pretty darn good last year too. But you're looking at a little bit more youth now because Fite is a true sophomore, because Clayton Smith is a redshirt junior. I think Dorbah has another year of eligibility. He's a senior. I'm pretty sure he has one more year. I might be wrong. They are looking at a scenario right now where they are going to be able to make life very, very difficult for everybody that they go up against. And the defensive line is going to make life easier for the guys behind them, for the guys that are, what's the term I'm looking for? They're going to make life easier for the linebackers and for the secondary, because when you have that pass rush, you're going to force quarterbacks into really bad decisions and really bad throws and whatnot. And that's where your secondary capitalizes. We'll talk about the secondary here in just a second. But rounding out my conversation here with CJ Fite, dude's a beast. I don't know if he's going to be a big sack guy. I don't know if he's going to be a big tackles person. He had 15 last year in basically a starting role. He might be around that. He might be closer to what Deshaun Mallory did last year with around 50-ish tackles. Mallory had 48 for himself. Maybe CJ Fite becomes that kind of player, and he might need to be, honestly, because there's not a ton of proven depth along the interior. But even if he doesn't, as long as he does what he did last year, he's going to be pivotal to the success. Personally, I do think he's going to take a step forward. I do think that CJ Fite is going to become a dominant interior player for the team. He looked really good last year. And to me, there's no reason that he won't be able to take that step forward this year. He's a beast. He's a stud. He's one of the most obvious guys for me. There's a couple more guys that we're going to talk about here in just a second before we shout out a handful of other guys that I kind of wanted to talk about. So we'll get to that in just a second. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, I appreciate you guys for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications. A shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. And again, check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming on YouTube. They're going to keep you up to date on everything that's going on, from the big news in the pros to college, across every league, plus our national shows. Check it out. Have something to watch while you're eating your dinner tonight. Let's round out our conversation moving to the secondary. There are two guys who stand out to me as obvious players. We'll start with Ed Woods at corner. You are replacing Ro Torrance, and that is not going to be an easy task, man, because Ro Torrance, for all intents and purposes, was one of the best players that the Sun Devils had this past season. Like, he was able to really shut down opposing receivers. And I wouldn't say he was up and down, but he definitely had plays where he got beat for sure. But as a whole, what Ro Torrance did for you last year and the previous year had you believing that you had secured a number one corner. Well, now he's gone. And you've got a lot of interesting guys for me, but I don't know that you have any proven number ones. Well, if somebody is going to be the number one for this team, it's Ed Woods. Ed Woods has been a staple of the team for the last 2 years. He's been with the program since 2020. He had 33 tackles last year, 2 forced fumbles and an interception. He also broke up 4 passes. This was as the number 2 corner. So pretty solid playmaker, all things considered. 6 foot, 175. He's got the profile to be a top corner and cover man. Now you want to see it all come together. If it does, then you should feel fine with your secondary still having a top dude. And I do believe in Ed Woods to take that step forward. And that's the reason why he's on my obvious list here, is because you need him to take that step forward. And if he does, like I anticipate him to, and like plenty of other people, I'm sure that Brian Carrington and Coach Brian Ward are both going to be looking for him to become that number one dude. If he does take that step forward, then hopefully you're not taking too many steps backwards, especially in secondary play. Maybe you become a better secondary unit entirely because the guy's behind the corners as well. But right now you're looking for a number one cover man. And Ed Woods feels like the guy who should be able to be plug and play there. I'm really, really excited to see how he takes a step forward now. And I'm really curious to see if he can be a number one corner, because he's flourished as a number 2 corner over the last 2 years. But is he a number 1 corner is what we're going to find out this year. This dude has a lot to prove, and I think he's going to be up to the challenge. The final obvious player I have here is the team's leading tackler from last year, safety Shamari Simmons. Simmons came in from Austin Peay and instantly was a playmaker for this team. Led the team with 73 tackles. He had an interception. He had 2 fumble recoveries. He had 6 pass deflections. He did everything. He had a sack. Like, they found ways for Simmons to make plays, and he responded. 6 foot, 185. He's a graduate player this year. This is the swan song of his college career. I'm hoping that he can find an opportunity at the next level. I look at his resume because he was really quality at Austin Peay prior to coming to Arizona State. He's got a decent little resume here. And if he breaks out in his final season for Arizona State, then watch out. He's got a little bit of everything that he brings to the table. In fact, prior to coming to Arizona State, he had 7 interceptions in 2 years for Austin Peay. If he is about that action, and if he becomes more of a ball hawk this year, maybe even just continuing to do what he did last year, you're going to have security at the safety spot. And you're going to have a lot of competition at safety this year. You have Xavier Alford coming back from the ineligible year that he had to sit out for the NCAA. You have Miles Rouser transferring in from New Mexico State. You've got Kamari Wilson transferring in from Florida. Montana Warren is back. There are no shortage of safeties this year that are going to be really competing for starting time. But Shamari Simmons already has a nice leg up on the rest of his competition. He's got proven he's got proven time on the field. And that's another aspect here is he's got starting time. He started, I think, every game last year. He was, for all intents and purposes, one of the most, if not the most reliable players for the Sun Devils on defense. When you have somebody like that is able to bring it consistently on a week-to-week basis, every down, whatever, did it in practice, just was a reliable guy. That's where I believe in Shamari Simmons to be that next level player for the team. That's where I believe in Shamari Simmons to be a captain for this team. And I don't know what captains are going to look like in 2024. But if you asked me to make a bet right now, who's going to be one of the captains, I would tell you Shamari Simmons, number 7. I believe in Shamari Simmons to inherit a massive, massive role as the team's leader in the secondary. And as the team's, what's the word I'm looking for? Bottom line is a leader, for sure. But really just being reliable, somebody that you can rally around. I believe in Shamari Simmons to do that. And I'm really excited for what he can bring this year. A couple other guys that I feel are obvious names. I'm saving the least obvious for tomorrow's pod. I feel like Tate Romney can kind of go either way. Tate Romney was one of your leading tacklers last year. He ended the season with 52 tackles. He had a sack. He had 4 deflections, a fumble recovery. He did this despite coming in as a redshirt freshman for the program after spending 1 year at BYU. He feels like an obvious starter once again for the team this year. And there's going to be some competition at the linebacker spot. They brought in a couple of guys through the transfer portal. You're going to have guys who are still on the roster like Caleb McCullough and potentially Crew Jackson that are going to stir up some conversation and some competition. There's going to be plenty of competition all over the defense and especially at linebacker. But Tate Romney, to me, is someone that really stands out as a obvious player. Maybe he's not obvious. I don't think I'm going to include him on tomorrow's show. Other than that, I think that's it for the obvious guys. And again, tomorrow we're going to be looking at the least obvious, kind of the sleeper guys, the ones that you aren't talking about. So make sure that you tuned in so you can check that out. Wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. You can stay in touch with that content by following me on Twitter. You can find me at Richie Bradshaw 36 and the podcast as well at LO_Sun Devils. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Again, like I said, we will be back tomorrow. And a reminder that we are now doing Sunday episodes as well. We're up to 6 days a week on the Sunday episode. We are going to be recapping basketball. There is a game tonight. Make sure that you tune into that. There will be a game on Saturday as well. So make sure that you're staying up to date with everything. I will talk to you guys later. Oh, by the way, tonight is for first place in the Pac-12, visiting Oregon. So make sure you tune in and show your support. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow, though. Until then, you keep it locked right here on